Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Atherton, and I'm excited to be able to share this time with you today, working through the ins and outs of the idea of learning and cognition and how these topics connect to the students we work with every day. There are varying elements in learning and cognition that need to be understood when working with students at any level. There must be a grasp of the concept of cognition while also understanding the intricacies that apply to adolescents in the way they learn and the behaviors associated. As teachers and psychologists, understanding these intricacies can shift the trajectory of working better with and understanding more deeply the complexities associated with adolescence in these topics. But they also give insight into appropriate techniques and methodologies to assist students in need. A detailed presentation of these concepts will be introduced throughout this seminar, along with the theoretical basis and a more in-depth look at topics within the concept. From this, the desire is that each of you leaves with a deeper understanding of learning and cognition, where better relationships with students can be obtained while better assisting in times of need, with our main topics this morning being: what is learning? What is cognition? What are some of the theoretical approaches to learning and cognition? Behavior analysis and social cognition theory, CBT, social cognitive theory lived out. What cultural considerations should be thought through with these concepts, specifically with students in 2025? Cognition domains, depressive cognition, and parental influence, concluding with a deeper understanding of these vital topics in the school setting. To start this morning, let's first work through an introduction of learning and cognition so we have a solid basis moving forward through the seminar. So to start this morning, we're going to first look at what is learning. As teachers and school psychologists, asking the question, what is learning, might seem ridiculous, as your life's work focuses on this very topic. However, it's vital to be reminded of the ground level reasoning behind what it is you do to better understand your students and help them to acquire this somewhat simplistic but profound idea of learning. Learning is the process of acquiring new knowledge, skills, or behaviors through experience. It can also be defined as the ability to solve problems and achieve goals. Even though, again, a pretty simplistic breakdown, we'll see shortly how deep this idea can go, especially when trying to help students to the best of our ability, especially in the context of how this learning plays a role in students' social lives outside of the classroom, and even how their behavior can be formed by this learning, and even how the other side of the coin, cognition, is tightly wound around learning. Next would be the concept of cognition. What is it? Every human being acquires information as they grow and learn about the world around them, the various things life might bring. This information is acquired, processed, and understood using thoughts, emotions, and senses. This process every human experiences of acquiring information, processing it, and understanding it through thoughts, emotions, and senses is called cognition. The concept of cognition is extremely important to grasp because it helps to bring to light several elements in the field of teaching and school psychology, including a better grasp on the way students think and process, how language, memory, and neural glue play a role, and how each of these can best assist individuals that may be suffering from various disorders. Now we can see the close tie that learning and cognition hold. One is the process of acquiring information and skills through experience, while cognition is the processing of this information that's been acquired. Both very important to understand when not only working with students, but teaching them and helping them process this information. Now, to better understand this concept, especially when the topic of students' behavior and learning and cognition is concerned, it's necessary to walk through a couple theoretical approaches. So what are some of the theoretical approaches to learning and cognition? A couple of these that we're going to talk through this morning would be behavior analysis and social cognitive theory. So when discussing learning and cognition, two methodologies come to the surface that are extremely different from the other, while at the same time desiring to accomplish the same task. This task is a more comprehensive comprehensive understanding of how the human mind functions in the context of learning and cognition. Between these two methodologies we just talked about, behavior analysis, previously behaviorism, and social cognitive theory, previously the theory of social learning, are very important when it comes to this topic. As stated previously, these concepts do tend to desire similar goals. However, the utilization of each differentiates drastically on the scale before conclusions are established. For instance, social cognitive theory emphasizes that individuals learn through their social environment. In this particular theory, the concepts of observation, self-efficacy, and self-regulation are key parameters that help researchers of this theory gain more depth and understanding of how individuals learn and behave. A main proponent and figure in this realm would be Albert Bandura. In his research, he focuses on the social element of learning, deducing that individuals tend to follow what others do in social environments. In his Bobo doll experiment, he showed that children exposed to a video of an adult abusing the Bobo doll would do the same when placed in a room with the doll. On the other hand, behavioral analysis focuses on environmental influences, and due to these environments, behavior can shift over time depending on the individual and specific care. John B. Watson is considered the father of behaviorism and brought this concept of environmental influences to light with his, what would be pretty unethical today, experiments on his son with a white rat. In this experiment, over a period of time, Watson utilized a classical conditioning technique to produce negative effects where the white rat was a neutral object paired with a loud sound that then produced fear of the animal and in turn fear of the other animals of the same color. Even though an unethical approach, Watson's experiments brought to the surface realities of the ability to condition an individual due to the environment and specific things within the environment, such as the rat and the sound. Another individual that Watson and his theories regarding behaviorism influenced was B.F. Skinner and his work in operant conditioning, helping bring this concept to light differently, focusing on rewards and punishment in behavior. Over time, this theory has drastically morphed from baseline of environment and outcome only to clear goals of recognizable behavioral change, emphasizing internal thought processes and how this differentiation can shift in individuals' behavioral patterns. Even though desiring a similar understanding of the human mind and its functioning, each of these thought processes is drastically different in their approach and their outcome. But as we can see, these different approaches can fall directly in line with this idea of working with students in the school context. One of the ways that we can do this is with a therapy called CBT. For you teachers and school psychologists who works with students daily in a teaching environment and helping with any of the issues that might be brought to the surface, both theories are extremely helpful and practical. One way this can be practical would be through the utilization of what I just said, CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, in the classroom or in the counseling capacity. In this therapy, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are worked through to help an individual move through varying issues by seeing each as interconnected and redirecting the negative thoughts that may hold an individual back. This can be an extremely helpful tool when discussing problems with students. For teachers in difficult learning situations or counselors with more in-depth personal issues for the students. Understanding the behaviors in play and how they think and feel in the process helps create an environment of good questions that can help refocus and mitigate the behaviors that are at play. I'm sure all of you have experienced that one student that's constantly disruptive in class, or the class clown. Perhaps in the process of learning and cognition, that student is unable to understand the information and in turn is acting out, which would be a great opportunity to utilize this concept. If the negative behaviors can be connected to the learning or cognitive issues that are taking place, there could be the potential for CBT methodology to assist. Next, we're going to look at how social cognitive theory is lived out. Social cognitive theory is also quite fascinating, especially when the conversation of students is on the table. Students are an excellent case study when discussing how a social environment can shift behaviors. Even when an individual knows a certain action is wrong, they may be more apt to follow suit with the wrongdoing if others in a friend group are willing to do the same. A social cognitive concept that speaks to these individuals well would be groupthink. When a group such as adolescents comes up with an ill-gotten plan followed through with the entire group's participation versus true thought given, it's a social cognitive theory playground. The students individually may never go through with a terrible thing. Still, they may very well do so if it's socially accepted and therefore brings out the reality of this theory in everyday life. This is vital to understand in any teaching position or counseling position when working with students, because to understand that even though they might be learning and processing well, their social environment might play a role in the way that they act and function. Some students may be extremely bright but feel showing they are smart's not cool enough and will intentionally bomb assignments simply for the social status of it. I'm sure each of you has someone in mind that this aligns with. This must be understood and mitigated as soon as possible. However, this is not just a simple task, since students are so intertwined in their social environment. Some ways to mitigate this would be to appeal to the reality of what the student is doing. An empathetic approach, understanding how difficult the social world is, but a reminder of how much bigger the world is outside of the high school walls. How the learning and processing now are setting the stage for their future, where these friends will most likely not be a part. With that being said, we're going to take a look at the cultural considerations that should be thought through with these concepts, specifically with students in 2025. When we as adults hear the terms, what the Sigma, or let them cook, or even Skibbity Ohio, our first thoughts, at least my first thoughts, are, where in the world is this coming from? When processing these particular theories, it's important to understand the cultural considerations that should be discussed with both. From its origins, social cognitive theory remains relevant in the current culture, yet several elements have presented themselves in the last 100 years that have shifted how this theory functions. Previously, this theory had its roots in observable social relations, such as how individuals respond in a group setting. But in 2025, this has shifted through the introduction of social media over the last 20 years, which should be considered when discussing this theory. These crazy terms are being established and sent out through social media, which has created an entirely new culture across the world. Individuals have access to a myriad of individuals and groups all at once, versus when it would be one group or individual at a time in person. With this introduction of the world at an individual's fingertips, other variables are in play, including how this theory functions when an individual may be alone in the room but still influenced by a group or ideas. Does a person give in to social pressure in a positive or negative way? The same as when the established point was in person. This also changes the environments in which social actions take place. Different environments for each individual could differ while still being a part of the same group. Previously, this would have not been the case for the most part, as each individual would have at least a somewhat similar environment in approaching a topic. It also must be mentioned that a large part of the world does not function in the Western individualistic mindset, as you're working with different students from different cultures, which would then play a role in how someone takes on social constructs and how they affect themselves and the world around them. In the same way, behavioral analysis must also be able to change with the cultural change of technology. The current culture of the world looks drastically different from the origination of this concept. Thus, behavior due to environment, thoughts, feelings, etc. has shifted with the times, focusing on the same reality social media brings to play. Issues within an individual's environment can be affected at large by a presence on social media, and that must be mitigated by a better understanding of how this cultural shift changes behavior as a whole. Again, as stated with social cognition, there should always be a view from the other cultures that may not behave the way an American may expect. This must always be a consideration when working with any student desiring to understand an individual's distinct culture and utilize the principles within these two concepts to assist from there. Next, after looking at these specific things that might affect working with students in 2025, we're going to take a look at specific domains of cognition. As this discussion continues, we're going to shift gears with a focus on cognition as a whole and how understanding how students process affects their learning and their behavior, and how an understanding of this topic can best assist you as teachers and school psychologists in the day-to-day, starting with the domains of cognition. When discussing cognition, it's important to understand the subcategories associated to best assist individuals dealing with various disorders from childhood through adult, specifically for the seminar in adolescence. With cognition, there are subcategories that bring out the intricacies of this topic. These subcategories are known as cognitive domains, as I said. The first of these domains to be addressed would be sensation and perception, or the ability to process information received through the five senses. In this domain, there are several areas where deficits play a role in cognition. When an individual loses or partially loses the functionality of one of the five senses, there's the loss of varying cognitive connection points. How someone remembers an event or memory based on sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch can be affected. This is extremely important to understand as students come in the door with varying disabilities, and therefore it needs to be understood that they may not process the way other students do. Meaning individualized assistance would be helpful to understand the best ways for them to learn, process, and their behavior will follow suit if proper help is given. Other domains presented alongside their varying deficits would be motor skills, including balance and dexterity, construction or the ability to reproduce other objects, attention and concentration, sustained attention, memory, storage and retrieval, executive functioning, processing speed, and language skills. Each of these elements help bring out in great detail the vast nature of understanding cognition. Each of these brings up important information that can help each of us process each element of cognition and how these domains bring out the different issues that may be present in this adolescent stage. I bring up these domains to not only bring up how vast cognition is, but also to show that there are so many different ways to see students through different lenses if they're struggling in some way. Being able to process these domains brings out helpful categories to work with students in teaching and counseling from all angles. Going one step further, a discussion on an extremely hot topic in the school system is necessary, and that is depression. We can understand the theories, even the domains. We can talk through how social media plays a role in all of this, how social elements play a role. But things get a lot more tricky when depression presents itself, especially in the realm of cognition. In 2024, a theory was developed to understand how depressive cognition develops. The theory utilized the negative predictive mechanisms to break down if events that take place in an individual's life affect the development of depression. Utilizing the triple network model, these researchers sought to determine if the different neural patterns in the brain associate with each other when negative information is received, which then in turn creates depressive disorder. In the research, it was brought to the surface that the structure could very well be used not only better to understand how neurological patterns function regarding depression, but the hope would be that a more detailed understanding of these patterns and how different events interact with them, and how this can assist in quicker diagnosis in the future. This is vital information when discussing children and adolescents, as a theory such as this could help bring out earlier diagnoses for students dealing with depressive symptoms. Even though as teachers and school psychologists, you likely won't have the time or capacity to do case studies on this research like these researchers were able to do. But what we can glean from this is that there is a reality that when negative events occur in a student's life, negative consequences can emerge, such as depression. This helps teachers and counselors like you stay on guard, listening when issues are presented in a student's life, knowing that when traumatic things occur, depression may be close behind. As teachers and school psychologists, each of you are aware of the importance parents play. The question for the seminar, as we dig a little deeper, would be, is there a parental influence in a student's cognition? Bringing us to the last point in our seminar, parental influence in cognition. The question presented in this final point is, does the way an individual experiences parenting as a child affect the way an individual parents when they have children of their own? The concept is that there is a cognitive association between the emotional elements that occurred during childhood, which would translate into a positive or negative effect reaction to situations such as a child crying. The initial proposed research discovered that even though there is a large distinction between the cognitive and emotional constructs, there is a link between both. The research done by Girard revealed a negative response or maternal sensitivity to a child's cry, depending on the individual, not necessarily a tie to the way the person was raised, and therefore does not have a drastic tie as originally anticipated. But the research highlighted that those with a negative response to the child's cry could be more closely tied to an adult attachment, which can better describe how an individual will respond in the presented scenarios. This idea better represents the unconscious aspect of an individual response to the situations presented, rather than a direct connection to the way an individual was raised and its effect on that person. You might be saying, well, that's all well and good, but how does this connect to teaching or counseling? And I'll say it makes a large difference, as it helps us to see students in a different light. When we can break down that the way they're raised, or even the way their parents were raised, and this adult connection that we're talking about can affect their cognition, learning, and behavior, we see that this is valuable information when discussing this topic, specifically when adolescents or students are concerned. Understanding how past events such as child rearing, or even those adult connections due to child rearing, can affect a person moving forward is vital in understanding how they operate as individuals as a whole. In conclusion, this seminar at its core is a reminder to be observant in your setting. As we talk through all of these different topics regarding cognition, regarding social media, regarding the different theories, understanding the details of these topics is important, but what is most important is what you do with it. This seminar is not intended to fill your heads with knowledge, but to actively fill your heart with knowledge. Having a better grasp on the different variables discussed can change the way we care for students, can bring light to troubling issues that may present themselves, and in the end, make us better teachers and school psychologists for the students' sake.